to our weekly tech talk centered around how to extend your existing data protection into Microsoft Azure. My name is Jason Webster with EGroup. I'm the principal of the Mid-Atlantic practice and have been working with data protection solutions as well as cloud solutions in the data center. It's across the cloud and everywhere in between for the past 10 plus years, and excited to bring some content today that we at EGroup have been sharing for quite a while around how we can leverage cloud to simplify, more efficiently deliver, extend, and create that scalability that organizations need for growing and ever-changing data protection needs. Also with a little bit of a special twist on this one, everybody receiving the invite for this specific webinar also has some of these existing solutions and has talked to us or Microsoft or various people about these in the past. And one of the things that we wanted to focus on was how can we extend your existing data protection solutions? So whether you have one, some, all, probably not all, or anywhere in between of these different solutions, I think there's something relevant that you're going to be able to take out of it. So let's talk about today's goal. Simply, again, how you can leverage your existing data solutions to efficiently store and recover critical information in and outside of Microsoft Azure. But more importantly, how are we going to get there? I'll start off with a brief introduction about EGroup, understanding that some of you know who we are, some of you may not. Tell you a little bit more about us and where we fit in the marketplace. But also, I'll go through our 4 key solutions being Rubrik, Cohesity, Veeam, and Zerto to tell you a little bit more about what they can do, the differences between them, as well as the capabilities they have when interacting with the cloud. And there's always, we always say some of the best things that we can do is share where others have had success with similar challenges and what they've been able to get out of it, because obviously the implementation of any data protection or IT solution overall is all about the results it can deliver and the outcomes, ideally positive outcomes, that organizations can take from implementing technology. We'll talk about how we go about doing it. So, basically how you can get started working with us to extend these solutions and get it right the first time, as well as what we all know and love, some available incentive programs that are out there to help you get started. And at the end, we'll take some Q&A, but quick, just kind of service announcement. We're doing a Microsoft Teams live event. So if you do have questions, Carly will be answering those questions and kind of queuing those up that I'll address at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions going along the way, I will address those at the end, or we can take those privately. So please use the question and answer feature of Teams. And just keep in mind that all of your questions will be able to be seen publicly as well as part of the recording, unless you specifically specify to us that you would like to keep it anonymous or take it offline. So with that, let's get started. A little bit about EGroup. We're a Microsoft Gold national solution provider that services approximately a little bit over 300 commercial and enterprise customers across a variety of industries, being financial, healthcare, legal, manufacturing, state and local government. And our focus is really around delivering speed and certainty in the cloud and data center. So what do we mean about speed and certainty? Again, we believe that IT is all about the outcomes that we can deliver for our clients. And we believe that some of the most powerful things that we can do is sharing the success that those 300 customers in the last year have had working with us, as well as the solutions that we provide, so that you can take those great ideas and implement them to your own success. And we do that across public cloud, private cloud, and everywhere in between, also known as hybrid cloud solutions. Some of the customers we do it with, again, we work with a variety of small and large customers across a various amount of industries. And when we talk about specific industries, whether we're talking about something like legal or we're talking about something like healthcare, we understand that each of those different industries have nuances, but we also believe that industries of all kinds need data protection. So what we'd like to do is kind of take those nuances. If you're a law firm and you're trying to protect your client's data, your case data, things that are personal information, secure information, how can we adapt these solutions as well as your cloud to meet your compliance requirements and store those? And generally in that field, store them forever, because they're things that need to live a long time. Or all the way to financial information. How can we meet things like PCI compliance? How can we meet your different audit compliances with both the on-premises and cloud solutions? We have success stories in all of those. Everything from government CGIS requirements to FDA requirements in some of the food manufacturing processes as well. So coming from an area of experience, we can talk about data protection needs because obviously data security goes hand in hand with data protection. So getting to the point of the presentation, really how can we protect your data with Microsoft Azure? Understanding that most people are familiar with storing information on premises or even archiving to things like tape or expanding storage volumes on premises to be able to meet ever-growing storage requirements. What role can Microsoft Azure play in this initially, but also long-term? And what other additional benefits can you get out of storing that information once it's there? So why Microsoft Azure at first is essentially Microsoft provides us a very deep, almost unlimited, certainly more unlimited than any organization we've come across and that needs to be able to store large amounts of data. But it also does it very efficiently. If you look over to the right, when we're talking about blob storage accounts and how information is actually written to Azure, we have many, many different options for how we can write that information based on how quickly we need to access it or recover it. And what price point, what recovery level, what recovery SLA that we want to be able to have with it. So basically, we have the ability to apply some of the best security standards in the world, have a depth of coverage that doesn't age over time, meaning we can write information that can store a year's worth of data, 10 years worth of data, a lifetime's worth of data, and be able to continue to expand that over time in any type of performance level that we need in an ever-changing environment so that we can avoid things like having to do storage refreshes, fix broken tapes, upgrade tape systems, do offsite storage, kind of the things that we have to do every 3 to 5 years. So some of the benefits that are going to be delivered here, I think, are somewhat obvious, which is, a reduction in storage cost. With the scale comes the efficiencies of that scale. So when we're talking about archiving data or even putting backup data into cool and hot storage, we're talking about some of the lowest per terabyte, per gigabyte costs that you can have in the total cost of ownership of the solution. But also consistency for the future, meaning, as we're writing that information, we can move that information as new technology comes out within the Microsoft Azure cloud to different things to solve challenges that may not even be present today, or we can continue to extend those storage volumes and continue to write to that for the long term in a deep capacity so that we don't have to continually reinvent the wheel every 3 to 5 years on how we're storing information. Letting Microsoft in the back end handle aging infrastructure, handle all the different things from a security standpoint that we need so that we can consume those services on demand. But also beyond just storing that information, which I think a lot of people understand in the market today, is the flexible recovery options. More and more so, we've seen organizations say, do I need a second data center or third data center? Or can Azure be my second and third data center so that I can only access that information or only use those resources, access those resources and to bring up that information that we need in terms of VMs and services and files as needed and only pay for them when we need them. So we definitely see those flexible recovery options that are simplifying things like disaster recovery as well as backup recovery in the face of, on-premises systems not being recoverable. And then the elimination of legacy solutions. I don't find too many people anymore that administer tape systems that say, hey, I just love my tape system. There's a lot of reasons for those solutions existing and the efficiencies they've delivered. But we've helped numerous organizations kind of take those efforts, take the different people in the chain of custody of that information, as well as reduction in the recovery time from those platforms by accessing cheap and deep blob storage within the cloud. So why Microsoft Azure? Virtually, again, limitless, efficient, secure. We can do a lot of things around security to meet all the compliance demands that you may have, as well as it's accessible and it's flexible. So as opposed to some other systems, it's a first-party type system where we can just restore information into the cloud. We can restore it back on premises. We can restore it to entirely new platforms. it allows us the flexibility that modern businesses need to succeed and be efficient in their IT consumption. So, and this is in no certain order, but I wanted to walk through kind of our 4 solutions. Again, that would be Rubrik, Veeam, Cohesity, and Zerto, and kind of where they fit in the marketplace, as well as what they do exceptionally well and what we've seen them do for our customers. Leading off, again, in no certain order, is Rubrik. For those of you not familiar with Rubrik, maybe don't have it on your data center today, Rubrik data management is all about modernizing how data is efficiently protected. And what they bring to the table is really powerful hardware in terms of bricks that they can put in your data center that have infinite scale on premises, but also cloud connectivity and really intelligent software where when you talk to modern organizations, it's, they like to say that we're a software organization because really the value in their products isn't the cloud, isn't the bricks that they put on premises. It's the intelligent software they put on top of it that allow you to automate and make efficiencies with your backups, as well as do things like recover to the cloud. And the way they go about that is 3 primary points. It starts with the brick. So a Rubrik brick has multiple nodes in it, has storage capacity, and that intelligent software built on top of it that allows you to orchestrate and plan your backups. And you do that by setting policies. So when we talk about things like, I've got 100 or 1,000 servers, what is the SLAs we need to recover? How quickly do we need it stored? How much do we want to store on premises? And how much do we want to store in the cloud? You build your data protection as a matter of policy, and then Rubrik gets to work with its intelligent software to meet that policy, as well as orchestrate the offsetting to the cloud in terms of archival to the different tiers of the clouds you need. And the first phase of that is with a product they call Cloud Out. So what Cloud Out does is, say you have a traditional retention policy of, 14 days of full backups, and then, after 30 days, you go to, for 30 days, you go to weekly, and then you maintain so many monthly backups, and then so many years. You can set that policy of how much information you want to retain on premises, whether, I only want the last 14 days or last 7 days of backups to be on premises. I want to be really, really efficient with the physical storage in my data center. Or I need a year's worth of recovery, depending on that recovery requirement. When we set that policy, Cloud Out manages automatically moving that information to the cloud so that you don't have to worry about where the information is restored. And then when it comes time to recover, it manages the recovery of that information from the cloud as well back to on premises to meet the SLAs that you specify. So things in the cloud have a longer recovery time. Obviously, we're still copying information, as well as it provides you that instantaneous near-term protection on premises. The second thing they provide, and this is where you get into the really value of modern solutions, is a capability called Cloud On. So in the event that, say, you're in a single data center and you're using Rubrik to protect, and you have a complete outage, and you say something along the lines of, it's going to take me X amount of time to restore. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks, depending on the nature of the event. Maybe it was a ransomware event or something like that, or something that rendered your data center inoperable and without an ability to recover towards it. Cloud On allows you to automatically say, I want to restore my virtual machines as Azure VMs. So an ability to provide a disaster recovery capability that you can restore directly into the cloud and orchestrate that move, obviously reconnecting networks and things like that, but the ability to actually restore in Azure as VMs in the case that your primary on-premises data centers are not available, and get those users running fast, but also to be able to protect that information that's in the cloud and restore back to on-premises once services can be restored. And that's where you can start to talk about the flexibility of disaster recovery sites, in which, if you have the ability to recover in Azure, you don't pay for Azure until you actually use it, other than the storage or writing to the archives. So as opposed to paying for things like fixed servers, network, storage costs that you hope you never have to use, you can pay for that stuff on demand when you need it, and only when you need it, and only when you're using it. And then lastly, as organizations have been looking to move towards the cloud cluster, the idea of you have the Rubrik brick, which is a Rubrik brick plus multiple bricks as a Rubrik cluster on premises to be able to store that information. you have the ability to have that same topology as virtual machines, not physical appliances in the cloud, so that you can natively protect your cloud workloads. So if you're running in a hybrid capacity between on-premises and Azure, you can have one solution that cross-replicates between them to be able to protect them all, to provide you that application, mobility, and recovery along the way. So Rubrik does this like a lot of the other products. I'm spending a little bit more time here because I want to talk about some of the benefits there. In both the way of archive, which is a very easy step to take. We always joke that, if Rubrik is from box to backups by lunchtime, you can be archiving from the cloud by the end of lunch. So very, very simple steps that you can take to start to write that information off and create a low-cost secondary repository, but also more things you can do from cloud on cloud instantiation, as well as protecting native cloud workloads. Cohesity, our next one, is very similar in this fashion, right? So similar architecture to Rubrik, talking about hyperconverged appliances that do data protection on the on-premises side. Still delivers that same capability from being able to archive simply from a policy-driven standpoint to the cloud, to be able to recover directly to the cloud, to be able to protect cloud-native applications, but also adds in a component that Cohesity Smart Files allows you to do file sharing on their appliances. So as opposed to being a pure backup solution that covers things like long-term retention, all the storage tiering, it's another thing. If you want some of your information in the archive storage and some of it in the hot, you can actually have these appliances manage that for you based on how data is accessed. But Cohesity takes this to another step and allows you to have scale-out file shares between multiple on-site regions, so that you can replicate information back and forth, so that there's some near-term information, but also the ability to take the least access data in those file shares and archive that off to a cloud environment, so that you can kind of move around and do some caching and information along those ways. So very, very similar to Rubrik, but also has an additional component that you can license called Smart Files that allows you to do the file side. But just like Rubrik in the capacity standpoint, very, very simple to add to the policies, to write it to Azure and secure that information. And last but not least, Veeam. Veeam is a product that's been around a long time, really, since the, kind of the virtualization wave hit with VMware originally. How do we manage backups and data protection and disaster recovery of now virtual workloads that we have the ability to take snapshots of? Veeam, like these other solutions, has the ability to archive that information off to the cloud, just from simple, like, I want to store X amount of data on premises and I want to manage that efficiently and write it to the cloud. Has the ability to recover to the cloud, but also has the added benefit that Veeam is 100% software. So when you're bringing Veeam on and you're running that as a virtual machine, or you're running that as a cloud instance, you can bring your own hardware, similar to how you can do it within Azure, which allows you to have a choice of hardware that you can deploy to that meets your specific recovery times and recovery point objectives from an SLA standpoint, but also the cost objectives that you're looking to meet. So very, very similar. And then also, all of these solutions have the ability to do things like protect Office 365 data. So if you're in Exchange Online, you're using SharePoint, you're using OneDrive, have the ability to grab that information and write that to Azure as well, without any software being deployed, using their cloud products as part of the licenses that you have with the solution. So we've seen organizations start with the data center. Archive makes a lot of sense, definitely from a cost standpoint and recoverability standpoint, but also organizations that have compliance policies around email, file sharing that's been moved to SharePoint Online or OneDrive, or even Teams data that's back-ended by some of those solutions, where they want to have more than 30 days of retention for it, and they want to have an off-site bunkered copy. It becomes really, really easy to configure Office 365 protection, write that to archive storage in Azure, and be able to recover a single document, single email, single calendar item, all the way up to an entire mailbox for an entire organization. In taking a little bit of a different tour, but kind of coming from a different angle, I would say, where the first three products we were talking about were absolutely invented in the backup space. Zerto was really built around the recovery space, and they've both been kind of crossing over, where Zerto has been enhancing their products to do data protection, long-time archival, and data recovery, and have certainly arrived there today, where some of the backup solutions have been focusing on backups and moving into the recovery space. Zerto is a little bit different from an architecture standpoint, because as opposed to using snapshots and protecting information from a backup standpoint, Zerto interacts directly with Virtual Center from a VMware standpoint, or Hyper-V, or your AWS or your Azure resources if you want to talk about multi-cloud replication, and intercepts those changes to workloads in real time and replicates those for very, very low recovery point and recovery time objectives from a disaster recovery standpoint, but also has the ability to take point in time snapshots of your information to store those off separately as backups, whether that be on premises or in the cloud. So Zerto kind of really pioneered, alongside of Azure Site Recovery, the process of, I want to get out of that second data center and stop refreshing that equipment I hope I never have to use. And I want to be able to replicate my primary data center to one or more Azure regions, or an Azure region, an AWS region, or I want to protect AWS and replicate that to Azure. They do that in real time, which allows you to get those sub 5-second, sub 15-second recovery points and be able to bring workloads up, whether it's back on premises or in the cloud or another data center, really efficiently. So through that, they check a lot of boxes. They have the ability to do cloud backup, cloud disaster recovery, cloud-to-cloud protection is something that you see common as organizations start to adopt cloud-first methodologies, as well as it's been very, very effective in cloud migrations. We've used Zerto many, many times as the tool that actually takes VMs from VMware or Hyper-V environments or on premises and actually migrates them to Azure VMs, because it handles that translation on the fly. So like the other ones, has the ability to very, very efficiently write information to the cloud. And again, when trying to recover to the cloud as that second or third option that you may have, you're only paying for that low-cost storage that you need, as well as a slight overhead to be prepared, things like domain controllers along the lines of being able to restore services so that you can then recover workloads and have them all connected, and only start paying for those VMs as you need them. And then once they're retired, stop paying for those. So we typically say when we're budgeting with a Zerto solution, that plan to only spend about a month in Azure in any given year in a disaster. Because if you have to declare a disaster and you spin it up, typically you're going to run out of there for a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, and then you're going to fail back to on-premises or back to production workloads. Or in some cases, we've seen organizations fail over to Azure and say, like, hey, we kind of like it here. We're going to leave it there, and we're going to stop trying to rebuild the on-premises data center, because, you know, we're just going to call it a loss, and we're going to use this as our moment to move fully into the cloud. So hopefully that gives you a really high-level overview of how these solutions go about it. And we can talk about some of the details very specifically. But again, it really comes down to the infinite scalability, the efficiency, the cost effectiveness, and the simplicity that it provides. Just the ability within a matter of minutes or hours to take an existing solution that you have, budget what it's going to take to store that information, budget what a recovery would potentially look like if you ever needed it, and have that additional point, whether you're trying to stave off adding additional infrastructure in terms of storage to meet backup requirements, or you're just looking to be a little more efficient in your data center, all the way to, hey, we want to have a less expensive and highly flexible disaster recovery site that we want to be able to use. All of these solutions can meet that, and they can meet that very efficiently with technology that you have today. So, a couple success stories, as I mentioned. You know, the most powerful thing we can do is share where organizations have had success. And we've had a lot of success with these solutions in particular. So I've got a couple here that I'll talk about. One with Zerto, a couple with Rubrik. There's some with Cohesity. There's a lot with Veeam as well that are kind of similar success stories. But these are just ripped from the headlines, kind of the most recent three that I've been working with. And one was a financial institution that adopted Zerto as well as Microsoft Azure. And as you can imagine, this financial institution needed to meet RPO and RTO requirements that were minimal. You know, banking systems have to come up, teller systems have to come up, high security is always a requirement. Some things need to be backed up in a matter of minutes to meet their disaster recovery requirements. That's where Zerto came in the journal-based replication that allows us to do that quickly. But they also needed to compete with much larger organizations in the ability to provide, uptime guarantees to their customer. And that's really where Azure came in. So instead of investing in, many, many different data centers and being able to have that global redundancy, Azure was the ability to have them make that happen. And then with a long-term vision of making Azure their primary workloads for running those systems in the long run. So Zerto was a perfect fit. We were able to install Zerto, get them replicating between different data center assets they had, but also extend that to the cloud. And today, they're about 50% of their way from migrating to their cloud-first strategy. And it was as simple as saying, okay, let's fail over this workload to the cloud. And now we're in a hybrid cloud environment where we're communicating back and forth. And if they ever needed to move back, they could do that as well with Zerto. So Zerto really provided them that low-cost solution, which is we're writing to Azure, and we're able to tell our customers that in the event we have a global infrastructure that we can fail over to, and we can meet the SLAs that we're providing, just like the big boys in banking do, but do so at a cost that was not equivalent to building out multiple data centers, and with the added benefits of creating them the flexibility to be able to move to the cloud. Another one, completely different story, completely different setup, was a large county government. So working with large county government, governments have been absolutely the target of ransomware lately, and it's been something that's been in the news for, you can't even say lately, over the last 4 to 5, if not longer, number of years. This organization was literally looking to protect large amounts of data and needed to increase their backup performance, but also wanted to scale back on how much of that information was restored on premises, but meet the government requirements for long-term archival of data, knowing that there was a complex scenario between some information was less critical and didn't need to be stored. Some information, as you can imagine, with county governments needs to be stored forever as a matter of record. So how do you discern between that, and how do you get really effective with your policies so that you don't kind of go with the default, like, I can't figure out what's what, so keep everything and keep it forever and have the cost of that? We were able to use Rubrik, the different policy engines, to define multiple policies that they have so that they can classify their resources for protection, be able to ingest that quickly on premises, but also be able to archive that out to the cloud so that that long-term retention, and this was the Azure Gov Cloud, that long-term retention, writing that information there, was able to do it to meet government's compliance standards automatically, meet the encryption standards, meet all the management standards, but have them take advantage of the cheap and deep storage that was available. Also allowed them, the ability to recover really fast, right? So in the event that there's under threat, great organizations get hit by ransomware every day. They had the comfort that if they needed to, they could restore everything in their environment really, really fast. And in a similar, kind of going from commercial to government to quasi-government, to give you some examples, the public utilities organization, similar story. We've actually done this one with Rubrik and Cohesity in the past, which would be very similar topic. They need to protect virtual servers and SQL servers. Public utilities are all about the services that they provide to the communities that they serve. There's always a bunch of resources out there, and there's a lot of data, mainly billing data, metering data, intelligence data, if you're talking about things like electrical grids, or you're talking about things like water and sanitation systems. There's a lot of information that comes in that the general public doesn't really comprehend or even think about on a daily basis that they do to drive efficiency in services. And they need the ability to protect that, but also create mobility with that data so that they can create better intelligent systems and invest in the future of more efficient water supplies, more efficient electric grids, and all of the different things that they have. So think of things along the lines of, I've got a lot of dev test SQL servers. I've got a lot of business intelligence data warehouses. How can we intelligently move that data around? And what Rubrik allowed them to do was obviously protect the data on premises, similar to the large county government example, but also replicate that to the cloud, and then be able to access that information in the cloud from an instantiation standpoint so that they could access the backup information for analysis while not impacting production in a very simple, easy way, allowing Rubrik software to orchestrate those movements of information along the way. So hopefully that gives you an example. Certainly lots more we can lean on for different industries, but also both small and large use cases. Lastly, what I want to get into is kind of how we go about this, because so far in the conversation, what we've talked about is the solutions, and they've all admittedly kind of sounded similar. Azure is a cheap place that's infinitely scalable to store information that allows me a lot of flexibility. I have these on-premises solutions that match or may not match. You may have some, maybe looking at others. My current data protection needs. How do we get all this to work together? That's what we're all about with our cloud backup and recovery assessment. And when we really talk about the cloud backup and recovery assessment, what we're talking about today is a package-built proof of concept that'll help you get started with these, meaning understanding what your data prevention or protection needs are, understanding the technologies that you have today. Are there gaps that you see that you need to meet? We want to understand those. We want to learn about those, and we want to help build you a path to fill those gaps if necessary. But understanding what you have today, but also understanding where you're at with the cloud. Maybe you're just getting started with the cloud. Maybe you have some workloads that are in the cloud. Is it secure? Have you built a governance model? Have you gone through all the identity and access management standards, policies, and landing zones? What's your network topology look like? If you needed to recover to the cloud, could you? Some of those questions that we may have, we want to understand that so that we can meet you where you're at in your journey between data protection, cloud, and everywhere in between, and help you build a plan to be able to adopt these solutions successfully. And then ultimately, as I mentioned, with a lot of these solutions that are existing today, the work isn't so much in spinning up a blob storage account or a series of blob storage accounts or connecting an appliance into an Azure subscription so that it can start to write information. It's more about how we want to do that, and more importantly, how can we secure that, as well as if we need that information, what do we do? We want to do that as a POC, so we can connect that information up, we can get data protection, we can get disaster recovery, we can even talk about workload migrations within the conversation so that we build you a roadmap. And the good news is we do have funding options available. This is always my disclaimer. We're very confident that everybody will be eligible for funding, and we can provide those funding options from Microsoft. However, no funding is approved until it's approved. So we'll have to work through those steps with you and kind of make sure that we can figure out how much, what's the opportunity, what are we specifically going to do, and then we can submit for those funding programs. And those are available to select Microsoft commercial customers. Typically that funding period runs at minimum till the end of March of this year, kind of lining with Microsoft's financial year is coming up at the end of June, and sometimes all the way to around mid-June. So we do have some time to go, but not a ton of time before this year's funding cycle ends and they start to plan for the next one. And also public sector customers, even quasi-government customers are eligible as well. So between the select list of commercial accounts as well as public sector customers, if there's any questions on what funding is available through the various programs that we can access, we're happy to explain that to you as well. So what we want to do from this, and the way this typically happens, is we'll spend some time with you, half a day, multiple days, depending on what we need to do to develop a plan, understand where you're at, assess your environment, understand the security requirements, understand what your retention requirements are. And then from that plan, we'll have a proof of concept that we've identified. Sometimes that proof of concept is completely production ready. Sometimes it's just a small set of data. It really depends on you. We'll define the policies within the platforms that you have, and we'll get you a subscription and get that set up if you don't have Azure today, alongside your Microsoft account team, and we'll get you started in the cloud and writing information. Again, that proof of concept sometimes is, a section of data where you're just trying it out, and sometimes it's, hey, we're ready to do this. Let's start writing it to our production subscription. And the outcomes that we deliver, one is, and I don't think it can be discounted, is a double check at minimum. But if you're not there today, like having a cloud architecture and design so that you know what cloud looks like for your organization, you have confidence in it and all the knowledge that comes along with going through that process. But really it's about lowering your archive costs, lowering your RPO and RTOs for recovery, creating that bottomless storage, eliminating the legacy things like tape, but also creating more secure, accessible, flexible environments so that you can move data more effectively. So how do you get it? Engage me, engage us, engage your Microsoft team, tell them that you heard it from EGroup, and we can have a conversation where we can build out a plan to get you started. So with that, conscious of time here, I want to open it up for questions and say a big thank you. Really, really appreciate everybody joining today, and looking forward to speaking with you all.